And one. Well, hey, Dave Molenda here, Positive Polarity Podcast. Hope things are going awesome for you this week. I have to say, I have a first, which again, we love having firsts. I'm not going to tell you what it is quite yet, but you will find out shortly. I have a question that we like to start with every week. This one is a question that is going to be really an engaging discussion today. And the question is your culture self-sabotaging or self-leading? And I thought about that and I was like, man, that's a really great question. So I had to find out who asked the question. And then I find out that who asked the question is a husband of somebody that we already had on, and that's our first husband and wife duo. So I'm honored to be hanging out with Rob Leone. How are you today, my friend?
I'm great, Dave, and I'm honored to be hanging out with you.
Well, that's cool. So for the people that are listening, Angie Leone, we had her on, and her topic was EQ in episode 236. So go back and check it out because we want to know, is Rob better? I want to know. Rob doesn't care, but I want to know who's better, Rob or Angie, because that's just I'm a super competitive guy, so that's just
Let's
how
just
it is. So
put it this way, she's much more fun.
uh-oh. Oh my gosh, there you go. Well, the high I versus high SCs, that'll
Yeah,
be kind of the
yeah.
difference there. So you're the owner of Black River Performance Management. So fill us in, if you could, Rob, on what Black River Performance Management is.
Sure. We are a consulting firm that specializes in really the human behavior space of organizations. And when I say that, I mean everything from pre-hiring through onboarding, through exiting people from organizations, strategy, performance, culture, all these different things. We've been, if you add the years of Angie and me together in terms of being in this space, we're 30 to 35 years of expertise from
Right.
research, from a variety of different things. So what we do is we actually aim to engage with our clients to determine really what's going on with them, where their concerns are, and then we build our solutions around their unique needs, their culture, their ambitions.
Sure. And you actually are a professor of human resource development at Idaho State. So you bring in this whole education component.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I run into a lot of people, Rob, they've either taught it and never done it, or
Yeah.
they've never really, learned it, but they've just done it. You actually have the flexibility and the power of both. So I'm super excited to chat with you today about it. So again, thanks for jumping on with us. Um, so as before we jump into the culture piece, as we do, we like to start out with your journey because as I mentioned to you before we jumped on, there's a lot of people listening from around the world right now that really like to learn about the story from corporate America to owning your own business. There's
Yeah.
no right way or wrong way. We say every week when we talk about it, just because Rob did it his way doesn't mean it's the right way or the way you have to go. But for you, you started kind of in academia. So kind of fill us in because it seems like a fun journey. And a lot of times people just stay in, a college world or whatever. You've kind of done both. So fill us in, Rob, on how that went for you.
Yeah, the quick aspect of it is I was a leader and a manager before I went on for my doctorate. So I actually had experience. I would deliver hundreds of hours of curriculum a year to people as a part of my leadership role.
Okay.
Um, and so I have a strong background in instructional design and delivery. And then I went out and learning lessons the hard way too. Let's put it that in there too. But then I went out and continued to advance my education and and got to a point where eventually I just landed in this space, right? Because my education I pursued was on organizational success and performance.
Okay.
And then eventually I evolved into some teaching roles, faculty roles. And the response from my students was really kind of influential that my organization is really struggling with this stuff, and I'm here learning this, but this needs to be brought to our organization beyond what I'm learning in this graduate program because
Sure.
they'd say my voice is not enough for this. And so from that perspective, that started to pique some interest. I started receiving really passive opportunities in terms of, hey, Rob, we heard about this. Can you come teach or can you present
Sure.
at this conference? Can you
Sure.
come spend some time? And so eventually, what I did was I started to bootstrap business opportunities. So, if I could do a quick segue, during COVID, I received a lot of referrals from aspiring consultants and junior level consultants that were essentially leaving their organizations to start. We had that flux during COVID to start
Yeah.
becoming consultants. And this is not what I really recommend, and I don't know if any of them are still in the business. So for anyone that's looking for a little bit of feedback and direction, I love the idea of bootstrapping while you already have stability in a position, because one of the biggest challenges people have is finding their voice to truly
Sure.
articulate what it
Sure.
is they do, so the end user can figure it out. And if you go out and set out on your own to start that business without that voice, it's really difficult to make that sale, whatever it is that you're trying to move in the service industry. So for me, it was a great strategy to build as I already had some stability and I still dedicated my time to that stable position. It's like right after this, I'm going back to the university to start working on full classes, right? So it's a
Sure.
balancing act of the two. And then eventually, when you have your feet and you have your momentum, because sometimes in our space, I don't know about you, Dave, but to me, for many engagements, it takes 12, in some instances, 18 months to sometimes go from that proposal to execution. And
Sure.
that's one of the things people don't really share with you when you go out to be an entrepreneur or solopreneur in this area is that just because you have 9,000 LinkedIn connections or followers doesn't mean they're sitting there waiting for you to give them services.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's well said. I think that entitlement piece is kind of the word that I use. I did some junior achievement work in our local high school and talking with some of the kids. There was just this entitlement, and it was kind of not, I think it was more out of naivety, Rob, than
Yeah.
anything, because I think they thought in their mind, you know what, I had this great idea for a business. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a website. I'm going to get maybe a little brick and mortar. I'm going to put a sign up, and man, the first day of business, there's going to be a line of 30, 40, 50 people waiting to
That-
get, to come in. And again, having started a few businesses in my life, it's like the kind of the exact opposite. There's so many businesses being started every day that if you don't have a great idea and a great a marketing way to get that message out, people are just going to drive right by. So I love that you are in both. And do you have a preference? Just no one's listening but you and me. Do you have a preference between, do you like working as a consultant? Do you like it in the university? Do you have a special
I
preference?
I love the interplay of the two
Okay.
because I'm spending my time on what I think is really foundational and important at the university, which is helping adults achieve based on data, science, and research. And so
Sure.
now I recognize what the constraints are of a 16-week semester in
Yeah.
academic frames. And
Sure.
so I get to do what I want to do. And that's why we have all these models built, these processes, because I know the limitations of what we teach people and how do we parlay that into the workplace. And so for me, come the end of the semester in the spring, I'm done. I'm cooked. I'm beat. I'm
Yeah.
exhausted from client work. I'm exhausted from teaching. The summer's a nice refresh, and I'm looking forward to both of those things really picking up pretty heavy here in the next couple weeks.
Sure. Wow, that's pretty cool. So I want to again talk to you today about culture because that word, whether people, when I travel around the country and I ask what's your culture, you get kind of either that blank stare or you get we don't have a culture. You get an occasional, oh my gosh, it's toxic. Or you have the big blind spot about, talk to a leader and our everything's fine, and then it's like you ask the team and it's nowhere near fine. So, what's the difference between like a self-sabotaging and a self-leading culture? That question that we started with. I kind of want to start there. If you could unpack that for us.
Yeah, let's actually begin it just based on what you've reflected on already, that
Yeah,
people are saying, we don't have a culture. And the
yeah,
reality is we do have a culture, right? Culture is occurring by design or default. And we get to discuss that. I just actually just came out a couple weeks ago. TD Magazine from ATD has a couple of my quotes in there that, people are going to pay for the culture work either on the front end or the back end. That at some point it's going to cost them,
sure.
whether
Yeah,
it's the development or the terminations, the turnover, even lawsuits, right? So, what we like to focus on is what is your culture? Where would you want to be, and where are you actually?
sure.
And the people that have that um, proactive view in many instances tend to be more healthy and more eager to respond. And you probably find this too yourself that they're more willing to talk to you and say, "Hey, look, we need some help." And the fact
Yeah,
that they even admit that is a good sign that there's a
sure.
lot of opportunity here to help and enhance. And then the other
Yeah,
side of it are sabotaging cultures because they are, in many instances, broken up, disjointed, siloed. They are doing what they want to do according to what they believe. And and it makes sense, right? Everyone's trying to do their work, their intention behind their work makes sense to them and their life, and that's why they do it.
yeah,
However, there's an incongruency that occurs in many organizations because how you might view the world might be very different than me. And then you multiply that by 10 employees or 100 employees. And so we're not necessarily even on the same page as we talk about the term of motivation, right? So
yeah,
how do we make headway in these areas when we don't even have a common vocabulary in the organization?
sure.
And then you factor in leaders that are given, the pay raise, the name tag, and the keys, but not necessarily the scaffolding to support their development to be more effective in that space. And so we're just ripe in an opportunity or environment for people to struggle. And my ambition at the end of the day for any of the people we work with is that they go home and their fuel tank, their energy within them is still sufficiently full to be present and engaged with whatever it is that's important to them after work.
Yeah.
And to me,
Wow.
that is the measure of a reflection of a healthy culture, is whether or not your staff collectively are experiencing that. It doesn't mean work's always fun and exciting. That's why
Right.
it's called work, not fishing,
Yeah.
right? That's why. But the point is that we have to do hard stuff at times. But when we enjoy doing it or being there or being among people, it makes it that much easier.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think, and I want to go back to what you said because that's really powerful. For people listening, if they are in any business setting, there's a culture there. And like you said, it's either there by design or it's there by default. And I love the intentionality of the design because then you get to control that. And I always think it's funny, I'll get your feedback on this, Rob, if I run into a business leader and they just lost like an A player, like, they lost a really good part of their team. I don't know about you, but generally I'm seeing these entrepreneurs try to have this fake facade, like, "Who I'm glad they're gone. They were a lot of work." They kind of like, I don't find a lot of people going, "Man, that stung." Like if you lose a quarterback in football, it's like, man, they're like, "Oh, I'm so glad they're gone. We're gonna have a new page and we're gonna have this and that." It's like, where is that like humility and that vulnerability of like, "Oh my gosh, that hurt." Do you see that out there, or do you see that much, or what are
Oh,
your feelings on that?
absolutely. Well, we're not very gracious at times, and
Yeah,
your comment on humility is spot on. That we take things, we process everything in life through our own lenses, and and sometimes we take it as a slight that someone leaves, right? Oh, I've
yeah,
invested all this development in them, and now they're moving and they're leaving us high and dry. And so
yeah,
that's part of what we try to do in our culture work is really not unpack, but back that out to getting to a really foundational intention level of what people are trying to do. Where's the compassion? Where's actually even the love and the grace for each other to to
yeah,
to to not arrive in that space, and I understand how we get there because we don't know otherwise, and we're just doing our best. But what we try to do is reprogram those narratives and help people move away from language like that because that language is very influential in yourself and then your team.
Sure.
Because there's nothing
Yeah.
worse than a team that's still there listening to their supervisor, complain about that because that team knows, I wonder what he's saying about us or she's saying about us when we're not here,
Right.
or are we next? And so it's just a super complicated thing
Yeah.
that I think if we have a little bit more patience and compassion in our heart to begin with and recognize
Right.
that everyone's here for the same reason, we don't find ourselves in that situation as frequently.
Well, and I don't see why there's not more safe places in work. Work should be a safe place.
Yeah.
I run into people that can't talk about it. I remember one of the businesses that I owned earlier in my career. We had 22 people on my team, and you could tell there was some rumbling and stuff. So I'm like, you know what? Let's get together and kind of hash this out. Get
Yeah.
together as a group, lock the door, and I say, all right, what's going on, right? And like just silence, nothing. You hear nothing. So I'm like, well, this isn't right. So for whatever reason, I was smart enough to be like, invite somebody in outside, they'll help me. So I invite somebody in and I'm in the room and they're in the room and the guy's like, so what's going on? Dead silence again. Well, fortunately, this guy was smart enough to be like, "Hey, Dave, why don't you go like answer the phone or something?" Gets me
Right.
I tell you what, Rob, the door ain't even closed, and boy, they just took off, and there was some things that again I was blind spots that I had and learning that I needed to do. Is that pretty common that you're seeing a lot of silence going on? I almost feel like that quiet quitting that we saw around COVID or since then is kind of like been around for a while. They just happened to term it, but I'm just curious if you see that a lot in your journey.
Yeah, so silent teams are often a symptom of low levels of psychological safety.
Okay.
And so if people that are listening to this, are leaders and they're like, well, our team doesn't speak up during meetings or they don't openly discuss and debate things, that might be an area to step back and do exactly what you're doing. Pull someone in, have this conversation, do a little bit of an investigation or analysis. Because once again, I believe people are trying the best they can
Yeah.
so they might not realize that they're shutting down the audience. And this is where I mentioned learned a lot of lessons along the way in my
Yeah.
early life. I was like that. I had to learn the hard way. I embarrassed myself, things like that. Um, I like to use myself as an example so other people can learn that, we all do this
Yeah.
and we can work through it. It's skill based, it's knowledge based. But once again, if we don't have an idea of all like with these things we talk about, whether it's personality, um, uh, motivation, even decision making frameworks and stuff like that, that is not a common line of education, right? And so for
Yeah.
all of our clients, we're working with people that have subject matter expertise. So let's take an engineer, for example, or an attorney. They have their own nomenclature, their own vocabulary, and
Yeah.
and one term means one thing. Like it's a universal agreed upon concept that
Right.
when we get to this human space, most of our people aren't psychology majors or IO psych doctorates and stuff like that. So there's no wonder we have these breakdowns and this lack of accuracy is because
Yeah.
we're all trying our best from our own set of lenses, our own vocabulary. And so that's why the work you do is so important. That's why the work we do is so important, is to help bridge that.
Yeah. Well, and like you said also in that before is that culture, either way, culture costs money.
Yep.
So the smart entrepreneurs, the smart people kind of think of that up front and be like, hey, let's spend the money up front to create the culture that we need. Let's, invite in Black River and let's get them to be able to help us with that. Because otherwise, go back to it's going to cost on the back end. Would that A player have left if, there was a great culture? I mean, I want for my clients, we talk about I want you to have a bench of people waiting to work for you because they hear that this is such a great place, rather than, hey, you know what, we're hiring anybody that can fog a mirror. There's such a difference between those two. And so, do you guys at Black River, do you guys end up doing that, coming in like I had that guy come in? Is that kind of where you guys come in and help people that are
Yeah.
struggling with culture?
So if we break them down into categories, we think about it in terms of people that are in trouble, right? They need to fix something. And oftentimes they're sent to us from whether it's an agency accrediting body or a board to say, look, we're just not where we need to be. And we believe this could help us. We have other groups that are just in great shape that want to do better.
Yeah,
And they like the bench of offerings we offer
sure,
because for most of our clients, they end up becoming partnerships. They're not a come in and train and leave. It's an ongoing arrangement at their desired length for a number of years because we have so much depth in what it is we do. And
sure,
then for others, it's the group in between. They're open, they know they need some assistance, they want their people to be more happy. To your point, they want what we try to do is create self-leading teams, right? One of the problems that we run into a lot are that the leaders can't even look ahead to lead. They're too busy looking down and managing the people, which has
yeah,
some undesirable byproducts associated with it.
sure,
And so what we're trying to do is to shift that culture so that all players in the organization understand a little bit more self-leadership and how they can take that into their own hands, begin to hold each other accountable so that that leader can actually look up, figure out where we're going, and do the work that they really truly need to do.
yeah. And that's again the blind spot, the blind spot that we see a lot of times with, leaders. My team is fine. I hear that a lot as like, no news is good news, out of sight, out of mind. Hey, if they want to say something, they'll say something. And again, without that psychological safety, they're just, most of them are probably it went from a career to a job. It went
Mhm.
from I'm out looking, for another opportunity. I'm going to do as little as possible. I was engaged. Now I'm not engaged. I mean, it doesn't end well. And I don't know why leaders won't take that responsibility. It's so easy to blame the team, you know? And I think that's a challenge. So we're going to take a break, Rob. When we get back, I want to just like, where do we start, with this for somebody that might be struggling with it right now? They don't want it to default anymore. They want to create that design. So we'll jump into that when we come back. Welcome back. I'm honored to be hanging out with Rob Leone, the owner of Black River Performance Management, and also a professor of human resource development at Idaho State University. So, from a PhD perspective, you could totally wordsmith us to death. So, tone it down to my sixth grade level if you could, for us. So, let's just say there's somebody listening right now, Rob, that's like, oh my gosh, for all this time in my business, I just thought culture was something that I didn't need to worry about. And now they're seeing that it's going to cost them, and they're seeing that they want to design that. Okay, if you have we're sitting across from that individual, where do you guys start with this? What are some simple things that we can kind of start with, the journey here?
Yeah, no, great question. We often start with pain points, right? What are the things that you're observing that are creating challenges for you? And we're not trying to assign blame or anything like that at the get-go. We're trying to determine what is it, let's just use you, Dave. Dave, what is it that you're not happy with where you're at as an organization, as well as this relates to individuals and team dynamics? And I just sit there and listen, and we hear a lot of things. And every organization, this is the rub, right? Like every organization has challenges. And so some people are afraid to talk about those, but all these organizations I go into deal with accountability issues, right? That's the most common deficiency as it relates to human behavior in the workplace and how that affects the overall organization. And so when people share things with us, it's not anything new or surprising. But the other side of it too is that we also recognize that you only know what you know, and your language is a reflection of your inputs. And so what I mean by that, you go back to that concept earlier where you said, well, my people aren't even talking about what the problems are.
Yeah,
Well, part of the reason for that is they don't have the language for it, right? I had a conversation with a client yesterday, and they're like, "We want to do mentor. We've been offering mentorship programs, but no one's ever really utilized it. And
sure.
the new people are asking for it. The returners are saying we're willing to do it." And I said, "Well, there's a lot to unpack here because." The new people are asking for the experience, but they don't know what they don't know necessarily in terms of how to guide that process. And then
Yeah,
your veterans, their hearts are in the right place. That's why they want to give back. That's why so many people want to teach or train. They want to contribute, but they don't know how to essentially translate their knowledge into doing stuff like that. And so that's where we
sure.
just come in and listen to what you need, what you're looking
Yeah,
for, do an analysis, and then start pulling together some solutions that are truly addressing the root cause factors in your organization, right? So oftentimes people identify symptoms, and those symptoms aren't necessarily indicative of what truly is contributing to the performance deficiencies, right? And so that's where we come in with that trained eye and that background is to say, okay, let's talk about this further and further and further. And now I can see where these bottlenecks are, the breakdowns, whatever those things are. And so let me pull a few things together for you, Dave, to bounce off you in terms of does this sound right? Are
sure.
these things that you're experiencing? And really working back and forth in a partnership to determine what that solution is. And I'll be really honest with them. If this is something that's outside of my wheelhouse, happy to make an introduction to someone else out there that can do this
Sure.
better.
Sure.
Because I think I need to serve them well by referring them on.
And so I'm just curious on this, Rob, because like team dynamics doesn't
Mhm.
seem to arise. It's not like I'm not thinking I, as an entrepreneur that has a team, it's not something that like shows up on my radar very much. I'm busy trying to make
Yep.
payroll. I'm busy trying to find the next client. I'm busy in all this stuff, like you said. And I wish that we as entrepreneurs could spend more time working, you know, on the business rather than in the business. But do you find that it's hard to get people to articulate what's going on with the team? Because that just seems like, hey, that's them, I'm me. You'd have to ask them. I'm just curious if you how you unpack that with people that really aren't maybe haven't thought about it much.
Yeah, it really depends on what their issues are. So I can tell you, I've spent a month investigating and interviewing people to get to the bottom of what's going on so that we can build solutions that meet the actual root cause
Okay,
deficiencies. I could also tell you, though, that we've done this enough that in a conversation, I can listen and I could mirror some of it back to say, now, what about this? And are you seeing this as it relates to that?
sure,
And what's
sure,
actually helping is that they didn't, once again, they didn't have the language to necessarily articulate it. They know
right,
it in their heart, right? In their mind, they're experiencing it. And so that's part of that. It's almost like a negotiation, but it's not a negotiation. It's a
sure,
dance, really.
yeah,
And
okay.
so getting through that.
Well, and it feels like there's part of, and it's dying. I feel like it's dying, the old us and them mentality, the boss and the team type of mentality, and that's where I'm hoping that that's starting to level out a little bit because it would be hard to identify pain on a team, but then kind of almost feel like that's expected. Well, that's just part of the team. Like you said, that's why they call it work. And it's
Yeah.
like, man, if you can't be trusted and you can't trust at work, if there's not engagement, if there's toxic things going on, nobody likes that. I mean, and in today's world with so many people switching careers every day and switching jobs, it's got to be hard for those types of businesses to keep people. Is that one of the key things you look at is kind of the retainage of people or the turnover? Is that pretty indicative of a poor culture?
Oftentimes it is on the front end, and then when we get to work, sometimes we're turning the culture over more and people. So our ambition is that we want your star players to continue to increase and become more effective and more self-sufficient. So that once again, like I mentioned, so you could lead. And
Yeah,
what we found is by really ramping up and leaning into this, we also have these other people that are eager to do better. They just need a little bit more polishing or dusting off or assistance and support, and they rise right up there. And then what we actually find with a lot of organizations is that the people that are kind of creating the problems in the organization or they're not really there for the right reasons start to identify like, oh, I'm losing my leverage here. I'm losing my handle on these other people and influencing and manipulating them. I just don't belong here anymore. So we actually have a high self-exit rate with a lot of organizations because what we're doing is we're really playing to kind of basic psychological needs, human preferences and behaviors because that's what brings the best out of all of us. And when people feel good in those experiences and those moments, they step it up and they
yeah,
then become a little bit more clear on, whoa, I could see how this person's detracting me and pulling me away from this. This is not good company. It's almost like what we heard in high school, right? Know who your friends are. And it's a good reflection of, are you
yeah,
going to get yourself into trouble or not, right? And it's the same thing is true how many years later now? 40
yeah.
years later, right? Like it's still true.
Right. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. I did not hang out with the best people in high school, and then it showed on my report card and my
Yeah.
my record. So definitely probably a good idea to think about that. But I gotta believe that that accountability piece that you talked about before, Rob, that's one of those things that entrepreneurs generally want to be in their business for themselves to get away from that accountability. And accountability and micromanaging can be intertwined and not
Mhm.
necessarily be the same. So for the listener, can you kind of point out that what accountability means to you because it feels very restrictive just
Yeah.
from what you said. So how do you incorporate accountability to be healthy in an organization?
Sure. So accountability is essential for correction and direction, right? So one of my favorite movies that I like to reference is Office Space. Do you remember that?
Oh
Many
yeah.
years
Yep.
ago.
Yep.
And Milton and his stapler, like no one had a difficult conversation with him. And so he existed for years, right? On the payroll. And that's essential for people because here's the premise we start again with. Is that people are trying to do their best. Day one, they arrive motivated and eager for a variety of different reasons, and they
Yep.
want to do a good job. If they're misperforming, if they're not performing in the direction they need to be for that job, they want to know. You want to know. I want to know. And if we have this belief that in order to show respect for each other, is that we offer kind, constructive accountability and feedback frequently, that's the best way to minimize large scale problems as it relates to feedback, firing, accountability down the road. So we talk about in
Yeah.
terms of drips, regular interactions that are corrective, as well as praising at times as needed. And you're right, there is this kind of what's the balance between accountability and micromanagement. And in fact, I talk about this frequently. I believe there's a good form of micromanagement. So let's just define micromanagement real quick. Micromanagement in that negative connotation means that there's a diminished level of autonomy that the individual who's competent is experiencing. So what that means is that the leader has a fully competent person and they're removing their agency, their independence, and their autonomy in their work process. That is what the classic micromanagement refers to. But I'll tell you, new employees, they need a healthy level of micromanagement
Sure.
because they haven't demonstrated competence yet or
Right. Sure.
consistency, right? And
Yep.
so one of the things that really gets me going is how trainers come in or consultants come in and say, you need more autonomy and that'll drive engagement. And that couldn't be necessarily further from the truth in some instances.
Yeah.
Autonomy is actually a form of neglect in some instances.
Sure.
So you have to have this understanding of the balance of the two. so that that accountability becomes more frequent, regular, and positive. And as you
Yeah.
mentioned, we started these things to be working on our own, right? But
Yep.
you know, blessing and a curse that we have staff now and vendors and all these other things that we can go back to working on our own if you want that kind of scale of work. So we have to make some decisions here in terms of how do we do this in a way that's meaningful and fun for us as well as the people we're working with, or we get out of the people business altogether.
Sure. Well, and I think that's why one of the reasons that we both use Disc so much is that we do
Yeah.
have a plethora of people on our team that are engaged different ways. They're motivated by different things. You know, their ideal environment is different. They
Yeah.
need to be led different. So it's so powerful to use a tool like Disc to be able to look at each individual on your team because,
Yeah.
like you said, how do you micromanage somebody? They don't even know where the bathroom is day one. They don't even know where to go. So it's like, you know what? Just find it on your own. That's like that
Yeah.
isn't going to work. Just like sitting next to them for the next 10 years and micromanaging everything they do isn't going to work. So, you know, there's the two extremes. But day one, like you said, they're engaged, and this is where, you know, as we start to land the plane today, I think it's interesting that, you know, Gallup shows that 1 in 3 people on our team are actually engaged in their job, which means 2 out of 3 people aren't. And I'm like, if I have a team of 10 people, you know, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have 6 or 7 people on my team that don't show up like with these great ideas, great intentions. So that, what are they doing? And that's where I think leaders, you know, we need to take responsibility for that. And I'm just curious, one question that's just popped in my head. Would you think if we had a better culture or a better handle on culture, do you feel like that engagement would go up? Have you seen any direct correlation between engagement and culture in your research?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And but not all culture that's good flows in that direction, right? It can still
Yeah,
diminish engagement. And that's one of the fear risks that I see with executive level people going. Now, I'm not sure we want to spend money on this because this is not just about parties and activities and retreats for people, right? And our belief is that, look, we can balance organizational performance outcomes with high quality cultural experiences.
yeah,
But we got to be aware that it takes work and people want to have meaningful experiences in their life. So, you know, that 1 in 3 didn't start out as 1 in 3, right? It was probably 95% started day one that they
right.
were eager, interested, as you
Yep,
mentioned, well-intentioned. So the question is what have we done to diminish that
yeah,
as an external body? And we still have to acknowledge that things happen in life, right? Conditions change and we get distracted at times, right? Whether it's death, divorce, financial things, all sorts of things, right? So that's a factor in this conversation. But what are we doing as leaders in organizations? As in, this relates really nicely to both DISC as well as accountability conversations, is how are we
yeah,
inadvertently training people to show up? So
right.
those the two of those three, there's a great chance that we've trained at least one of them, if not both of them, to show up disengaged.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's how we approach it.
Yeah, that's great. That yeah, I had one client that their onboarding was literally like a 90-second discussion. Here's the bathroom, here's your passwords, here's who you report to, here's your chair. And you know, oh, by the way, I'm gonna have lunch with you today, you know, as a leader, owner, whatever. Like I'm gonna really sacrifice, you know. And then it's like, have at it, you know. It's just like, wow, people, like you said, they walk in day one, they're pumped, they're ready to go. Well, it doesn't take very long if there's not a 60 or 90-day onboarding process. It doesn't take long for that engaged person to start to get disengaged. And that's where I don't think disengagement is a team thing as it is, but it's more starting at the leadership level because we're the ones influencing them, like you said, day one. So I love that you did that way. So thanks for sharing that. One last question. Robin, I'm gonna let you go. What would your tip of the day be for someone listening? Maybe it's something that we covered. Maybe it's something that hasn't got out yet, out from you. So what would your tip of the day be today?
Just one tip of the day. There's so many.
Yeah,
Our
right,
conversation's been awesome, Dave. I'm like, oh, can I talk about onboarding? No, I need to talk about this now.
right,
Uh,
exactly. Hey, if you
my
got
tip of
two,
the
that's fine. Just
okay,
so you know,
okay, let's do
Angie only
that.
had one, but so I mean,
Well, then I better have two. Okay,
exactly.
so my two different tips. Number one, let's go back to onboarding.
Yeah,
Onboarding should be that new employee should be like when they go on vacation, that they show up and they don't have to worry about anything. That they show up and the priority of the organization is socialization. It's not policies and benefits. Granted, I need to know how to have my teeth insured, cleaned, whatever.
yep,
But that it doesn't need to be the scope of the onboarding. People need to learn how to integrate just as they did in school, as just as they do on vacation. They need to know where the pool, the spa is, the tennis courts, things like that. And then
yep,
we make it fun because vacations are fun. So onboarding should
yep.
be fun. My tip of the day though would be, especially for us leaders, remember people are looking at their experiences, especially as it relates to entrepreneurs, in your organization through a different set of lenses.
Hmm.
I had a conversation. I was doing a workshop once, and someone said, "Well, we just need to help people find their purpose." I said, "That's an interesting concept. Can we talk about that a little further?" Your purpose for you as the CEO is a lot easier to arrive at because of the level of investment you have in this organization, not to mention the level of compensation you receive that enhances the quality of your life.
Yeah,
You have people on your team that can't even talk about purpose because some of their basic needs aren't even being met.
yeah,
And and remember that they are approaching all this work through their own sets of lenses. And they might not love this organization as much as you do, which I think is a really dangerous space to be in as a leader
fair.
is to overlove it and not realize that their people just can't love it as much. And so it's
Yeah,
just to be mindful of we have as leaders a unique vantage point that many of our people will never experience or understand. So it's important for us to recognize that we need to seek to better understand what their vantage points are.
that's great. And I think that if there's people that are aspiring to be leaders, take it seriously because it's way more than just telling people what to do.
Yeah.
And working less. I mean, there's just such responsibility and direction and fulfillment and things like that and leadership that, sometimes you don't get. You just think, oh, I can't wait to tell people what to do, and that's if you work at McDonald's and you want to tell the fry guy to put the fries down, great, but there's just so much more to it on how to turn that guy into an engaged team member. Maybe he can stick around at McDonald's for his life rather than it just being a step, through. So that's fantastic. So hey, listen, what would the best way for people, Rob, to get a hold of you if something that we talked about today really struck a chord with them and they want to learn more about Black River Performance Management? What's the best way for people to connect with you?
Sure thing. Super simple as it relates to the website. The URL is Black River, the letter P for performance, the letter M for management.com. It was too
Okay.
long, too much of a mouthful, right,
Yeah,
to do the whole thing. So you get on
sure.
there, emails on there, info@blackriverpm.com. You could even go into some of our bio stuff. You can see what Angie's doing. You can see what I'm doing. There's a variety of resources on there, but also
Good.
on LinkedIn. Let's connect and open up conversations on LinkedIn, or just even learn from each other's feed, right? And so my LinkedIn is, as you mentioned, the last name's pronounced Leon, but it's spelled like lion, right? And so that's the tough thing. It's
Yeah.
Lion. And so do a search for Rob or Robert, and then the last name Lion, spelled like lion. And you should be able to find me there. And we love engaging with people. We do it all the time at no cost. I'm happy to have conversations, offer feedback, and just explore what is it that you want to accomplish as it relates to your life.
Sure. Wow, that's awesome. Fantastic. Well, I'll tell you what, for everybody listening, if you don't take Rob up on his offer, you know what? I don't feel bad because he's offering to sit down and have a conversation with you. I'd love to be a fly on the wall, but again, feel free to reach out. And if you're not comfortable with where you're at, where your culture's at, what a great opportunity to have somebody like Rob and Angie come alongside you to be able to really help you with that. Because again, nothing worse than losing good people, nothing worse than losing good customers, nothing worse than having just the ick feeling, eggshells. You just don't want to be in work. It's not a safe place. You have control over a lot of that as a leader. And I just want to leave us with that today. So thank you, Rob, so much for hanging out. I can't wait to keep learning from you and Angie. It's so cool to see you guys. And again, from Idaho State University, thank you to them for letting us tap into your all the stuff that they're paying you to learn. We're getting it for free, so thanks for that. I appreciate
Thanks, Dave.
that.
It's been awesome.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks.